This is Seeking Delphi, number 33, Disruptors, with Matt Ward. I'm Mark Sackler. The future lives here. It seems that most discussions of the future center around disruptive technologies. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, blockchain, 3D printing, self-driving cars, cultured meat. The list goes on and on. But is it the technology that's disruptive, or is it the individuals driving the technology? Elon Musk, after all, single-handedly gets about as much attention as all the disruptive technologies combined. One person fascinated with disruptors, both the technology and the individuals that drive them, is Matt Ward. He's an innovator and entrepreneur who hosts his own podcast, appropriately entitled Disruptors. We recently interviewed each other for dueling podcasts, so to speak. Here's my interview of Matt. My guest today is the innovator, entrepreneur, and host of the Disruptors podcast, Matt Ward. Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Tell me about what it is you're doing and why it's important.
I've always liked TED Talks. I find them great, but they're 10 to 15 minutes. And you can get some bite-sized nuggets out of someone when they have a canned presentation. But the concept of the Disruptors is there's a ton of huge issues in the world. We need to tackle them with the smartest people that we have. So that's exactly who I find. I find the top scientists, AI engineers, space, roboticists, economists, politicians, etc., and just get on and talk about some of the big and hairy issues that people want to and don't want to talk about. So most people, they have a specialty. Maybe it's longevity, maybe it's space, maybe it's improved renewable energy. But everyone else has focuses outside of what they're doing day to day that really intersect. So I try to get smart people to talk about not just their fields, but the big issues and synergies they see in other areas.
Do you have any areas that are of particular interest or specialty to you, or would you, on the other hand, consider yourself to be more of a generalist?
I would say in a lot of ways I'm a generalist. I'm ADD. I come at this as an entrepreneur, built and sold a couple companies in the past, and wanted to, with the time that I had, now that I had a little bit more free time, to focus on learning as much as I can in a bit of a neural network of chaos, so to speak. I think that's the way that people learn the best, is when they have those interlapping intersections. So I have a lot of experience with e-commerce, a lot of experience with marketing, dealing with startups, network effects, marketplaces. But I wanted to be able to bring different perspectives to everybody, because even the guests that you have on, I'm sure you have the same thing. You'll bring up a question and be like, oh, I've never thought about that. I should go talk to XYZ. And it creates those spontaneous connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say in a lot of respects, we have similar focuses. But what is your background that kind of got you into this in the first place?
My background was mechanical engineering, found out fast there was no way I was working for someone else, and got into starting my own businesses. I got into the audacious, let's build the next social media startup to take over the world kind of deal before transitioning into e-commerce. I built the top crowdfunding podcast only to find out it's hard to make money if everyone you're helping is trying to raise money. You can't really get paid. So I started manufacturing products. I was living out in Asia at the time and started selling in the US, just home and garden type things, nothing particularly special. But I've always had an interest and passion in big problems and inequalities in the world. You could say I'm slight left-leaning, but I also have other more moderate tendencies as well. I want to say I'm kind of someone where you could try to guess, but you're going to have to guess issue by issue, because I don't really go across any type of party lines. My focus, I'm big on longevity, I'm big on health, I'm big on trying to figure out better ways to design the world, because I think a lot of the incentives that we have right now in the world are structured to create exactly the kind of world that we have. And we can't fix the world we have without fixing those incentives.
So, what do you think we need to fix? I mean, there's a lot of things. That's a pretty big question,
It's a big question.
but we can go item by item. But you've interviewed a lot of people. I think. How long have you been doing the podcast?
Been doing it around about a year now. So we're at about 120 episodes ish.
Okay, that's a lot of episodes in 1 year, but in that time, I'm sure you've come across some pretty fascinating stuff. Tell us some of the most important things you've come across.
A couple of the more interesting topics that guests have brought up. Douglas Rushkoff brought up one of inverting the capital gains and the salary or dividends tax structure. So right now we have a system where investors and companies are incentivized for growth at all costs, because when they grow, their value of their stock goes up, so they can sell it for capital gains as opposed to having to pay out dividends. So it's roughly a 3-to-1 tax difference. So just by creating something like that, you create a company that ultimately has to become cancer, the only thing we know in the universe that continuously grows, for it to meet shareholder expectations. So Apple's got to put out iPhones they know will break next year, and they've got to slow them down when they put out a new version so that you have to buy a new one and another and another and another. And we created an unsustainable system that demands growth at all costs. That was one of the really big concepts that I thought, where flipping that around, suddenly you create businesses that can afford to be sustainable, because suddenly, instead of having to focus on getting larger, they just have to focus on kicking off money to their shareholders. So they're not investing in growth just for the sake of, as some startups do, pouring money into Facebook ads to acquire more exponentially expensive users, hence why Blue Apron's IPO went terrible. They can actually focus on building sustainable businesses. So I think that's something that you see a lot right now in the startup and tech space. On the flip side, there's a lot that's done right now in terms of subsidies that could really be better allocated to other areas of the economy. Specifically, essentially, we could solve a lot of our problems if we just got rid of subsidies for oil and other pollutive technologies and started putting those into more renewable energies and more sustainable business practices. I feel like a lot of the problem we have right now is based around our school system. That's the way that we all think. We have history, we have English, we have science, we have math, and for God's sake, don't make them touch. And when it comes to all the problems we have today, they're all really complex and dynamic problems that you only solve by bringing together people and expertise from all areas. Because when you make a change here in terms of improving, when you make a change in terms of putting out more solar energy panels, then that hurts a business somewhere else, which leads to someone going out of business, which leads to. People don't think about the consequences of having such an interconnected world, hence the trade war, which is going terrible for everyone.
I think the notion of things being interconnected is a really important one. Professional futurists are taught to look at how things are interconnected. I like to quote the comedian Stephen Wright, who said, "I'm a peripheral visionary. I can see the future, but only way off to the side." Well, as futurists, we do need to look way off to the side and see how that's connected to what's straight ahead. So in that regard, I'm wondering that, yes, you can miss unintended consequences by not looking at what's off to the side, but maybe you miss some opportunities too. So what are some of the opportunities you've come across in doing your podcast?
I think it depends on where you are in your life and in your career. So in general, the best way for people to make an impact is to make money quickly doing something that is net positive on the world, but not necessarily the focus of what they're doing. So for instance, if I wanted to go and help in third world countries, I could go and build houses. I'm one guy. Or I could start a business helping people build houses. Suddenly we're 10 guys. Or I could start a business investing in companies that are helping builders building businesses. Suddenly it's 100 or 1,000. Or you could make a boatload of money, so to speak, starting a social media company and then go invest that in areas where you can create that exponential impact. But in terms of areas where I think there are prime and ripe for potential, obviously I lean towards longevity. I think there's a lot happening and that will be happening in the health tech space in terms of making people healthier. If you just look at the fact that there's a 10-year difference between the average life expectancy of the upper 10% and the lower 10% in the US. And that's before we even take into account CRISPR and a lot of the technological trends and nutritional trends, especially, that are coming our way. The fact that we've learned that Alzheimer's and most neurological and chronic diseases are caused or activated by inflammation, I think those are huge areas. Where we're going to in terms of renewable energy, that's not something that most people can play in terms of hardware is very expensive and hard. But thinking about not that, but some of the outlying things. So for instance, driverless cars are going to be very transformational, as are these scooters that we've seen in all of these cities. They're huge for last mile, and cars are big for, we live in the US and everything's designed to have a car, otherwise you're screwed. But what's going to happen when we have these vehicles driving themselves around? It's not only going to be that people no longer own the vehicles and that we're using fleets. It'll also be the hairdryer or the hairdresser that drives to your place, picks you up, drops you off at the restaurant that's actually a 5-star restaurant on wheels. And then you go to sleep and you wake up in Chicago for your meeting there, where it couldn't be a Zoom meeting, so you had to do it in person. There's a lot of implications that are going to happen as real estate doesn't become real in terms of being set in a location. It can move where you need to move. We can get rid of parking lots. What do we transform those into? There's going to be big business in terms of transforming those parking lots into something. There's a lot of opportunities out there when people are looking for them. What I would encourage people to do is think about the opportunities that are very not net positive on the world, and the ones that people are motivated by. So if you're interested in health and longevity, focus there. Don't focus on creating the next AI company. If you're interested in space, well, crap, there's a lot that we need to do in terms of building backup plans, and in terms of asteroid mining, in terms of getting humanity to be an interplanetary species. We have a long way to go, and the costs are just coming exponentially down.
Let's talk about now one of the potentially most disruptive technologies out there, one that everyone seems to be talking about, so I'm sure you've covered it in your podcast, and that would be artificial intelligence. What's your take on that?
I feel like there's two trains of thought when it comes to AI. One is responsible and one is ignorant. So obviously I'm a little bit on the worried or skeptical camp. So in my opinion, if you ever are seeking to create something that is inherently smarter and more capable than you by leaps and bounds, and those leaps and bounds happen in the blink of a millionth of an eye, you create a scenario where you have, in essence, your successor. There's no conceivable way that any technologist has ever explained to me why you could ultimately rule out something superior to yourself breaking free. And that's kind of how I think about artificial general intelligence. Now, in terms of simple AI, which are basic algorithms, Facebook shows you the pretty cat videos. I have software on my computer that helps me in terms of responding to customer messages. We have, you have a voice assistant who's doing things for you. Those are two totally different ball games. Once you get into the creativity that's involved with general intelligence, I think general intelligence is a combination of productivity and creativity. Not only are you able to do something well, which is simple AI, but you're able to think outside the box and creatively reason things. That, in my opinion, is a way you could define better artificial general intelligence. And if we reach that, I think all bets are off. It's a black swan moment you can't really predict, but if you pretend to be able to predict it, which a lot of AI researchers do, hint, hint, their grant funding comes from them not realizing that this is a problem, then I think you have a problem in and of itself.
Well, I'll certainly second that motion about unpredictability. And in fact, I'll call to memory for my listeners or for those who missed it, a review that I did of Max Tegmark's recent book, Life 3.0, where he put forth several different scenarios about where artificial intelligence might go if we get to that AGI. Will it come on quickly, slowly, controllable, not controllable, mostly for good, totally for bad? And the key point that he made was that for every one of the scenarios he put forth, he knew at least one expert in the field who advocated that that was the likely outcome. There were other words all over the place. Nobody really knows. So to move on from that, though, you talked about yourself as a left-leaning moderate with opinions that tend to vary from issue to issue, and maybe also a tinge of skepticism. So you're kind of similar to me, but when you look at the future, on balance, you consider yourself an optimist or a pessimist? Is the glass half empty or is it half full?
Depends on which face I have on. In terms of the podcast, I'm definitely optimistically pessimistic. So I don't really know a better way to explain this other than I'm incredibly good at being cynical and finding problems with things. And I'm an aspiring optimist. But in a lot of ways, I'm also a realist and a pessimist. And I feel like a lot of people that are honest with themselves find themselves in similar buckets where we want to be more optimistic because we know it's important and valuable for our health and creating a better world. But I'm also very good at seeing the problem. So in a lot of ways, I am pessimistic, but also childishly optimistic in others.
That's in that regard, I'm going to ask you to throw me some advice that I could give to my millennial daughter who said she doesn't want to have kids because she doesn't think there's any future for them. Is there anything I could tell her, or do you kind of agree with her?
I definitely don't agree with her. I think that's a stupid perspective because, and here's why. So actually, Rushkoff again, another one of the guests I was telling you about. He was telling me about an event that he attended. It was a conference, and they were having him speak, and it was at essentially a billionaires only type deal. And one of the first questions they asked him was New Zealand or Alaska, and he looked at him like, "What?" And they said, "Where should I build my bunker?" And that's the kind of thing where I don't know if you swear on here, but you want to pull your effing hair out. Because you have the most powerful people in the world. And the thing about a story, especially a story about the future, is it's never right until it is. Until then, it's only a prediction. It's only something we can create or decide against. Am I going to brush my teeth tonight? Yes or no? And by quitting on something, by giving up before the game is started, that's the only way to guarantee you lose. By playing the game to win, assuming you can win, like Henry Ford said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right.
In that regard, I think you and I are very similar in our outlooks. We may be somewhat different generations, but similar in our outlooks. But if you had any particular advice about the future for my listeners, for your listeners, for the general public, what might that be?
The future is not a thing and you don't have to live it. You get to create it. So go figure out what that thing that makes you freaking burn and solve that big problem. I think too many people live with assumptions that there are rules and they're constrained by certain operating systems of society. Go to college, get a job, get a wife, get a nicer house when you get the upgrade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of that matters. Almost none of that applies. And even if it did, would it be relevant to you? Figure out what the problem you want to solve is and then go freaking do it. Because the more people that are doing, the better world that we're going to have. Because a lot of the people on top aren't the doers. But when the doers rise up and do something, then the people on top can't really do anything about it.
So for you and I as advocates, then keep advocating what we're advocating, I guess. How about you let our listeners know how they can find your podcasts and any other relevant material you're working on?
Yeah, if you guys found what we've talked about interesting, or if you're just interested in more incredible episodes, long form stuff where we get similar people to the awesome caliber that Mark gets on, then go to disruptors.fm. And if you go to disruptors.fm/risk, you can find the 11 existential risks I'm most worried about. Yes, I said I'm great at being a cynical pessimist at times. And I think there are a lot of challenges we have, but all of those are also opportunities, places to build businesses, places to build a better world. So disruptors.fm, we're available on all major podcasting platforms. And you can find me on Twitter at MattWardIO. There's way too many Matt Wards out there.
Okay, well, and I have to throw in one last comment here because you mentioned the 11 disruptive technologies. That's quite a few as existential risks. I actually, one of my early podcasts was with Ole Hagstrom, who was the author of a book called Here Be Dragons, Science, Technology, and the Future of Humanity. And he basically was a mathematician, and he actually used mathematics in some of the existential risks, which was really kind of interesting. What kind of viewpoint did you take toward your existential risks? I'm just curious because I need to go look at that probably.
The one I was most worried about would not be what you would expect, but it would be actual biotech, but used for good. I think there's so many people and so much money to be gained by what we will all be working towards that the possibilities for a high school kid or anybody in college or anyone starting a business to create something truly terrible is truly terrifying. There were a lot of other things on there as well. But in general, I think there's a lot of ways for us to wipe ourselves out. There's a lot of ways for us to build a goddamn better world. And there's a lot in between because technology is a dragon. It's a double-edged sword. It really depends on which way you cut.
Matt, I agree completely. And let's hope that somewhere in between the terrifying views of dystopia and the impractical, unattainable views of utopia, in that vast middle of countless alternatives, that we might find one of the better options for humanity. Thank you, and best of luck going forward with all your work.
Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I had fun. Cheers and have fun, guys.
Matt and I come to our present places in life by very different routes, but it's clear that in terms of our podcasts at least, we're kindred spirits. You can find links to Disruptors and other related sites on the webpage for this episode at www.seekingdelphi.com. And I'll be sure to put out an alert when his interview with me becomes available. You can subscribe to Seeking Delphi on Apple Podcasts, Player FM, or YouTube. In the coming weeks, we'll be exploring the future of nursing and healthcare, the future of food, and teaching the future, among other compelling subjects. Thanks again to Matt Ward for today's interview, and to you for listening. My technical assistant is Mohammed Maroof. Until next time, I'm Mark Sackler.